All right, coaches, welcome back to another episode of the Cornerstone Coaching Academy podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Nelson, along here with Sam Klein once again. Today's topic is going to be about so, what we're going to do over the next several podcasts is we're going to take the swing, break down the different elements of the swing. We're going to start in sequential order. So, today we'll start with stance, stride, load, and then we'll finish through the swing, and then we'll probably go into some defensive movements and some pitching movements after that. And then the goal is to give you for each of those just some really, really specific things that you can do when a kid is having these issues on your team. You can pull from this and say, aha, here's something that I heard on this podcast that you are able to pull and hopefully help some of your players as well. So today's topic is going to be on the stance. We're going to talk about the stride and load process as well, getting into hitting position. So, Sam, let's start. I'll start just asking this very basic question. When you're working with athletes at your facility, what do you talk to them about their stance? Is stance something that you're going to spend a lot of time troubleshooting, or what's your philosophy regarding hitters and their stances?
Yeah, so when we attack this, obviously it's the first part of any of the swing, how they're set up. We want to be in the most comfortable position for them as possible, whether that's straight in a line, if they're closed a little bit, if they're open, whatever they get comfortable with to start is the baseline where we're going to start. Um, so there's nothing specific on that end as far as where they need to set up, but whatever they kind of go to, what's their go-to initially. What we want to see is feet in a good position, relatively a specific position to get into is shoulder width apart. Shoulder width apart, something athletic where we got 50-50, 50% on back foot, 50% on front foot, or even a 60-40 where we're a little bit back, 60% on the back foot. But that's kind of where we want to start off with, and creating good posture. So posture is going to be their spine angle when they're standing in the plate. We're going to try to avoid being straight up and tall. We want them to be slightly tilted in their posture. So we can get into more specifics on that. But really, it's where they like to set up, get into an athletic position, 50-50, and somewhere where they can create some rhythm. All right, rhythm, get their bat moving a little bit, get their body moving a little bit, and feeling athletic overall.
So stance for me is not something that I look at unless there's an issue that it's causing later on down the road, right? Like, so if I've got a player who gets, so I'll kind of, and I know we're working forward in the swing, but I'll kind of work backwards from hitting position. If they're able to get
Mm.
into hitting position on time, which we'll talk about in just a second here, um, then I don't necessarily care where they start from. If they aren't able to get into hitting position on time, then maybe where they're starting is a little bit of an issue. Something that I've done with players who are, I guess, maybe confused or uncomfortable with where they should stand or how they should stand is I'll have them put their feet together. I'll tell them to jump up in the air and then just land with their feet slightly wider than shoulder width apart and freeze when they land. And minus the posture thing that you were talking about there, where they've got that slight spine tilt, that tends to get their knees in a good position to be athletic. They're good width apart there. But again, it's not something I look at a ton. The one thing that
Sure.
I do
Yeah.
like our players to avoid, and so this is the one area I will jump in if it's an issue, is if their hands are particularly high at their stance. Because to me, that means you're going to have to bring your hands down and then back up in order to get into a hitting position. And especially for
Mm.
a younger kid, that is just a ton of movement to have to time up. So,
Yeah, and from my perspective, I kind of differ on that a little bit because with especially the younger crowd, so 10 years old or younger, even 12 to younger, they start with this low hand setup. And now anything that's middle or middle up in the zone, they have to fight and work up, and they're always constantly underneath
Mhm.
the ball. So I get what you're saying as far as being overly high or overly low. So any of the extremes, I think we're on the same page in that front. Any of the extremes, too low, too high, like too low would be considered setting up at your belt, and too
Yeah.
high would be somewhere way above your head or so. So trying to find a good, and we can get into this in the load phase, but somewhere around your rear ear or rear shoulder is kind of where a general setup is for you listeners out there, for any of your players. Setting up back there, rear ear, rear shoulder, is a good general spot. But like you said too, the setup necessarily isn't our biggest issue. It's get them comfortable, get them feeling like they can create some rhythm, um, and then ready to fire from there, because we can troubleshoot from there.
All right, so let's move on to the stride then. Some of the issues that coaches probably have with stride. I know this is a big one at the lower levels. That's going to be that lunge, right? And I think lunge is kind of misinterpreted a lot of times. People might see lunge as being a long stride, and I don't necessarily think that's the case. To me, a lunge is what happens to the weight when you stride. Like
Yeah.
if you are striding, if you have a long stride, but you get down on time and you stop forward momentum when your heel hits the ground, I don't necessarily think that's a problem even in younger kids. Um, the issue that you have is when you have this long stride and then your hips, upper body continue through that and they don't stop behind that
Mm-hmm.
leg. So, talk a little
Sure.
bit about some of the things you do with stride and maybe that, that particular issue, because it's one that pops up a lot for guys who coach younger kids, but then also at the high school level as well.
Yeah. So for guys who typically we want to have some forward momentum, stepping to the pitcher, some weight shift forward. That's a general standpoint. We want to be moving forward slightly. So if a guy has a very wide setup, we're going to limit that even wider stride from there. So if guys have a relatively wide setup, and you'll be able to notice that, coaches, where their feet are outside their shoulder line, we don't want to necessarily go much farther forward. So we're going to typically pick up and kind of land right where they started. Now, guys that start more narrow, more shoulder width apart with their feet, now we want to gain ground. We want to create some spacing so our legs can work. So what we do specifically is two things. We set up cones at their feet where they start, and then have them stride out to where something that feels comfortable for them again. And then we place that third cone down. So they'll start off with the two cones where they start, stride out, and they got to get to that third cone, which is their stride length, every single time. So that creates consistency and a visual so they can see where they get to. The second specific thing is putting a bat down or a PVC pipe or some sort of barrier in front of their front foot right on their setup. So I have my setup to start, feet are where I like to be, and then I have a barrier right in front. So that gives me a visual and a cue to lift my foot, gain ground, and at least create some spacing, positive spacing moving towards a pitcher.
One of the things I like to work with stride, when guys are overstriding, it's not as big of an issue at our level as it is at the younger levels. Because I think at the younger levels, players try to generate power with their stride. So they try to stride forward and then
Mm-hmm.
everything kind of comes forward as one. And they're trying to generate like bat speed and power with that forward move instead of stopping it and rotating. Um, so one of the things that I like to do if we have a guy who's overstriding, there's two specific things I'll do. One of them is to take the bat and the whole hitting sequence away and let them feel what their body feels like when they're throwing a med ball. Because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times what happens is they're thinking about the ball so much and they're thinking about trying to get forward. And so they just go at the ball and they lose everything forward. You put a med ball in their hand, you have them go from their normal stance, and they're just going to do like a scoop toss into a wall or, toss it out to a partner who's a ways away. But then that starts to help them feel what it's like to post up that front leg and what it feels like when they land and rotating behind behind that front leg. The other thing that we did the other day, which I kind of liked, and I got this the other day when I was at a meeting with Ryan Johansson, was setting the machine incredibly slow. Like we had our machine like probably 45, 50 feet away at like 35 miles an hour. And that really forces guys, number one, to adjust timing appropriately.
Right.
And so I like
Right.
it for that. But number two is if you're going to generate any power at all in that scenario, you've got to land into your front leg and rotate behind it. Um,
For sure.
so
Yep.
you see the first couple of times guys are landing and kind of the front leg gives a little bit as they're, doing that lunge. I just think staying behind your front leg as you go up the chain, it just helps so much with adaptability. Like you land and you're on time with fastball, but if you're behind that front leg, you have a chance at curveball still. If you're in front of that front
Yeah.
leg, you have no chance with curveball.
That's such a massive cue for guys that are super young, guys that are high school, college to go off of. And it's across the board. Get to your stride length, wherever that is, and stay behind your front foot, stay behind your front leg, because that's the break. You got to have effective breaks to be able to rotate the barrel through the zone. So yeah, that cue for all you coaches, all you listeners, use it. Stride out, rotate behind your front leg, rotate behind your front foot. It stays in the ground from there so that all that energy goes through barrel. I mean, very simple, very simple.
One of the things that you've been really hammering this year with guys, um, and it's something to be honest with you, something I have not thought of a whole ton until the last couple of years, is how maintaining posture
Yeah.
through the stride. Like, where do players who, if you preset their spine angle, where do they tend to come out of that as you're watching? Is it in the stride? Is it like where are guys losing that posture? And what are you doing to help address that?
Most of the younger guys, they get out of it instantly because it's such a new feel for them. So will basically, instead of having your spine angle straight up and down, standing straight up like most people like to do, we're going to tilt them slightly, 10, 15 degrees. It doesn't have to be egregiously over, but the cue there is chest over the plate, your head and chest over the plate, as opposed to your lower half, your knees sinking into over the plate. Okay, so if we have our chest and head over the plate, that creates a 10-degree, 15-degree angle over the plate. Now my barrel can enter the zone on a much more direct line and continue to stay in the zone for a long time instead of spinning out. So the younger guys, will preset them in that 10 to 15-degree angle, and then right as they start moving, they come right out. Older guys who have a little better sense of their mechanics, they'll stay into it longer once they get to foot strike, but then as the rotation happens, then they start popping back up. Because like you said, everybody wants to just force the power. They want to try to go at the ball instead of creating that angle that we keep talking about and then staying in that angle through the rotation all the way. You see guys like Aaron Judge, Mike Trout. When you see them load and get to foot strike, they have the tilt. Through their swing, they still maintain that tilt, which allows a much more uphill angle through your bat path, giving us get to get power and home run power. So hopefully that kind of answered what you're looking for.
Yeah, so like let's say we've got a kid who's during that stride phase, you've got him preset, he
Mm-hmm.
strides, he stands up. He strides, he
Mm-hmm.
stands up. What are we gonna do to help him hold that posture?
The cue is to have chest over plate, like I mentioned, hips
Mm-hmm.
behind your head. So really what we're going to do as well is kind of take a pipe, take a bat, and then have him kind of hold it behind his back as far as creating the tilt. And then so he understands where his back angle is and where he needs to maintain through the swing. Another cue we can use is just simple front toss when we preset that angle. And then as the guy swings through the ball, his eyes are going to stay over the plate so that he knows where he's at with his angle, finishing his swing. So that's kind of what we do. Guys get a better feel for that posture and
If
video, of
you're
course.
if you're coaching older, not if you're an older coach, if you're coaching older players, um, I think one of the things that we can use is that Romanian deadlift feel. Like if you've got someone who has some
Yeah.
experience in the weight room, like that feel right there, that's been a lift that we've really hammered this year. That's been like our big lift this year has not been back squat. It's been Romanian deadlift. Like that's the one that's in there every single day because it's that hinge, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
can start to get strong in that hinge. Like if you think about like uh, a uh, a full squat, a full deep squat, right? Like a hitter, a pitcher, a fielder, almost never in that position. Catchers, yes, but hitters, pitchers, fielders, never in that position. If you think about a Romanian deadlift where you've got knees slightly bent, hinge, hips back, angle, spine angle down a little bit. Our players are in that position all the time. So that's the position they need to learn to generate power from. And so that's maybe if you've got
Fielders,
some yeah, if you've got some older players who've been through the
mm-hmm.
weight room, I think that's a pretty good place to help them kind of remember that feel from the RDL. That's where we want to be, is that
For sure.
hinged position. So
For sure. Even
um,
fielders, fielding a ground ball, two hands out in front, so your butt's back, your chest is over your toes. So yeah, again, very good cues there.
let's talk then. So we've got stride length. We kind of talked about that. Let's move on. Last one for today, for today's podcast, and let's talk about the hitting position. I'll go ahead and start with hitting position because to me um, it's the most important thing I think for hitters, because if they are not in a good position to hit when their front foot hits the ground, I don't want to say nothing else matters, but almost nothing else matters. Because they are going to really struggle to hit if they are not in that good hitting position. So one of the things that here's the checklist of things I'm looking for. Did the weight shift from slightly back to 50-50 when their front foot hit the ground? Okay. So, you mentioned that 60-40 earlier, and I really like that. That's the cue that we use. We use 60-40,
Mm-hmm.
and it might be a little bit less than that, but the idea is we want
Mm-hmm.
just slightly back. And then as you stride forward, we're going to weight shift because we have to have some horizontal momentum into that front foot when it lands. Um, when that front foot lands, then we want the hands to be kind of in a puncher's position. So if you want your kids to learn where their hands should be, have them imagine hitting a punching bag as hard as they can and watch where their hands go to hit that punching bag. And that's going to be a pretty good position. You just put a bat in that position, the body knows how to get there, right? Like they would never put their hands way back behind their rear elbow to hit a punching bag as hard as they could. They would never keep their hands in by their chest to hit a punching bag as hard as they could. The other thing they're going to do when they do that is they're going to take their hands probably from somewhere near their rear shoulder up and back so that their hand is between their shoulder and their rear elbow, and that
Mm-hmm.
elbow is going to elevate just slightly as they get into that position. So when you're looking at it from a baseball perspective, it's going to be weight 50-50, slight inward rotation, right? So their front shoulder is going to be slightly inwardly rotated. Too much is bad. If you can see the numbers on their back, it's probably bad. They've got too much internal rotation with their shoulder there. And then the knob of their bat is going to be facing somewhere towards the catcher, right? If we've got a kid who's got his knob towards his mom in the fourth row up there, that's going to be a bat wrap. If we've got a kid whose knob is right down towards his rear knee or his rear foot, they've got no movement, they've got no load, they're going to generate
Mm-hmm.
very little power. To me, like when you take major leaguers, they start all over the place. Before the call, we were talking about Julio Franco, we were talking about Craig Counsell. Those guys are extremes. But if you pause them on front foot strike, other than one being right-handed, one being left-handed, they'll look pretty similar.
Yeah, so I'm gonna run this one by you. Uh, the rubber band analogy.
Mhm.
Is that something you're familiar with or have heard or kind of used with your guys at the team level for
Yeah,
getting into launch position?
yeah, we've used the rubber band before, where you hold it in one hand, you wrap it around the other foot down there. You can use J bands for this. So if you have a team set of J bands, like I think the more I'm learning about J bands, the more I think they're not just for pitchers, like they're for hitters, warming up
Right.
rotation, warming up those things. Um, but yeah, I think I like that stretch the band analogy. I really do.
Yeah. So for the listeners, you guys can do this at home with any individuals and small group team, your whole team for that matter. Take a rubber band, take an elastic material, attach it to the front leg, front foot specifically, and then have your players hold it with two hands. And then as you step forward with that front foot, you're pulling back with both arms. So you're creating that stretch across your entire body, creating tension, like Kyle said, creating that tension and then releasing that tension through our rotation. That's what all major leaguers do. They do it at the highest level. They create tension, they hold tension, and then they release tension, just like a rubber band. So you're not going to shoot a rubber band very far if you only pull it slightly and let it go. You're going to create a full pull, right, going in opposite directions, and then it's released on time to fire. So we talk to guys like you're not going to be able to hit a ball 400 feet if you just take one step forward and slap your hands to the ball, right? We have to create this coil as we step forward, as we go back with our hands, so opposite directions again, and then it's released. So that's the rubber band analogy, very simple to use. And then getting into launch position with that. Last thing I want to mention too with that is when we go in opposite directions, we're creating that coil. All right. So we're stepping forward, but we're also loading our top half back in a sense, back behind your rear hip. So front foot's going forward. We're coiling around our rear hip, and our head needs to stay centered though. As this weight shift happens, we can't have our head flying too much forward into a lunge or staying too far back. Our head position should be centered with our chest in between both feet. So that's another cue to use once we get to launch position. Very key to be able to launch effectively.
So here's a couple things that we'll do with guys who struggle with their load specifically, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we have the biggest problem we see is that guys have dead hands. Like they have been taught at a young age, make contact, make contact, make contact, make contact. And the easiest way to make contact is to start with dead hands, to not move them, go right to the ball and make
Right.
contact. And you hit it to the second baseman at 11U, who's terrible, and he boots it, and everyone loves you because you got on base, right? um, but then at 12U, all of a sudden that second baseman makes that play 10% more. And then at 13U, that second baseman makes that play even more. And at the high school level, you're out 95% of the time and you're a terrible hitter. And a lot of it is because they are starting with those dead hands, right? Like they are terrified, some of them, to have that movement because at such a young age, they are just taught get the ball and play, get the ball and play, get the ball and play. And I totally understand it because swing and missing sucks. And it's hard to play the game if you swing and miss when you're 10 years old all the time. But in order to scale, in order to be a successful high school player, college player, they have to have hand movement. So
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to think about things we can do to make them have hand movement. There's two big ones that come to mind for me. Number one, and these two can be combined. Number one is to give them a heavy bat. Like we swing some heavy bats. We will swing bats that are like 42, 44 ounces, depending on the strength of the kid. Like we're not going to give some that just absolutely crushes them. But if you have a 42-ounce bat, and we don't, it's not really for bat speed. I think light bats are for bat speed. Heavy bats for me are for feeling the sequence of the swing,
The
because
sequence, right?
if you don't sequence it, if you don't move those hands up and back when you've got a 42-ounce bat and you weigh 165 pounds, you are never going to be able to move that bat. That bat is going to swing you. So we'll use heavy bats with guys who have poor loads or no hand movement.
So
Um,
what's your impression on the get the elbow up analogy or the
it's not
cue
as
that you always see?
horrible of a cue as like you it's like the one thing that everyone makes fun of, right? Like
Right,
the
right.
dad in the stands, get your elbow up. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a terrible cue. It's probably misused, but you know, if the hitter's hands are dead and he hasn't moved at all and his elbow stapled to his back rib cage, he needs to get his elbow up. Now he doesn't
Right.
need to get his elbow up to the extent that, you know, where it's above there, but there's got to be some space in that back area back there.
what I think is more effective language is elbow back, right? Pulling the scap, pulling elbow in a straight line almost. Because if you're, like you said, if you're up into a extreme position, then you're just creating longer with your bat path. So
Yeah.
elbow back is more specific, and then taking both hands wherever you start, like the Babe Ruth drill for an example. Start the hands anywhere, too high, too low, bat tip down to your front foot,
Yep.
crazy positions. But then when you stride forward, you get to that same launch position every time.
Yep.
So another thing for listeners to be able to use: hands starting in extreme positions, and then as you step forward into your launch position, both hands go directly to rear shoulder in the most optimal position to launch.
Yeah, we've done this sometimes, like at our camps, where I will say, "Get here's the position we want to end in." I show them, and then like start with your barrel on the ground, both hands on the bat, ready,
Yeah,
go.
yeah,
The other thing, this was like, so that was the other one I was going to mention was just extreme positions, make them move, make them
yeah.
not be afraid. I've gone as severe as to tell players that in a front toss drill, so someone who's just completely dead hands, they have to touch the knob of the bat to their knee before
Mm-hmm.
their front knee. So if they're right-handed hitter, knob of the bat to their left knee before they hit. The other one was then the barrel of the bat to your left toe. So in their load, they have to tip the barrel down, lift their foot way up, touch their left toe, and still be able to time it up and hit. Um,
They
and the
think you're
thing,
crazy.
they think I'm crazy, but like they have to move then. They have to
Yeah,
be unlocked. They have to be given that freedom to move. Like I think
right.
that's where we get so caught up with young players is like we're afraid to let them move. And I saw a tweet from Eugene Bleecker the other day who was talking about how the two most similar groups and biomechanically are young kids who have never been coached and major leaguers. And in the middle, we coach all the athleticism out of them. Like if you take a young kid and just watch the way his body moves, watch the way he swings, obviously someone who's been taught a little bit knows the game, but like before they really get into like teaching them how to swing, their body moves more like a major leaguer than like a high school kid who's been taught how to swing because
Sure.
they're terrified to move, some of them.
When we do those extremes with the Babe Ruth drill, barrel to the ground, would you agree that the best cue, the simplest cue would be go get the ball, go hit it? No further explanation needed. Sometimes they just need to hear that. Go get the ball, make it happen, find a way, and then
Yeah.
the freedom of movement happens.
Yeah, and if you've got a player who's really struggling with that hitting position, it's a great time for video because you'll start them in a weird position, you'll take the video, you'll see where they get to naturally because that's going to be a more natural thing, right? They're moving finally. Watch where their hands get to. It will not be, stapled to their rear
Mm-hmm.
shoulder. Like it will be up and back. And if it's not, then that's one more cue to add in there. Okay, you're going to start here. I want you to get to here and then swing. And then that's just one more cue. But like I like the heavy bats and I like the extreme positions so much because we're letting them find the solution that works. And we're not coaching them. Okay, now take your hands and move them from here to here. Like go figure it out.
Yeah, and I think guys like the challenge of hitting with heavy bats too.
Yep.
I mean, anyone that comes in, they want to grab the heaviest thing they can and see if they can hit it. It's a great challenge for guys.
And but it just as an aside is a lot of people think that's a bat speed thing. Heavy bat's not really a bat speed thing. I mean, they're part of a bat speed program, but really light bats are the bat speed
Right.
generators. For me, heavy bats, and this is a totally different topic, but so I'll be brief with this. But the heavy bats also work to disrupt timing, and so we work off of heavy bat, a little more velocity, and really make them have to adjust timing with the heavy bats. So that's what we generally use them for. But for us, load and sequence are the two big ones with the heavy bats.
I'm sure people would be curious too to just to get your thoughts on why you say underweight bats are for bat speed as opposed to heavy bats.
Because it's speed. Your body's moving faster. Something we, again, like golf does all this research. So baseball guys don't have to. But when they go on to club speed programs, it's like 2 to 1 light to heavy, underweight to overweight, like 2 to 1 swings or 3 to 1 swings, light to heavy. Um, and so they've done all that research, and those light bats, because you're moving them faster, your body learns to move faster. I mean, if you want to learn to move fast, you need to move fast. So by taking
Right.
10,
Yeah.
20% off of the weight of the bat, now you're going to be moving faster. Your body's learning to move faster. So
That's excellent. That's a great explanation. Yeah.
and we do have, for those of you that are Cornerstone Elite members, we do have a bat speed program in Cornerstone Elite that you can utilize, and we do utilize it with a team. We'll put that. Now this is way off topic, but we'll put that bat speed program right at the beginning of practice before we do, our skill hitting or anything like that. That bat speed program will go at the front because we want to do it when they're fresh. Throw that into your practice once or twice a week. If you're a younger coach, I mean, I would make that the beginning of almost every practice because, again, skills that scale, bat speed plays at every level. Bat speed's like money, can't have too much of it. So like just keep hammering bat speed, bat speed, bat speed, and when they do make that contact, it'll be so much more fun than grounding out to the second baseman, and then all of a sudden the second baseman gets good at 13 and you're out every time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, I can attest to that using the bat speed program. We know it works for our guys. A lot of guys have seen big improvements, so definitely a resource to continue to use.
and we do have a couple podcasts on bat speed. They're not too long ago. I don't know the exact number, maybe 255 or something like that is bat speed. We can link to that in the show notes for you as well. So we're going to go ahead and stop there. Again, we're trying to keep it between around 20 minutes, but as we get this conversation going, sometimes that's hard to do. So we'll stop there. We'll pick up next week with the next part of the swing, which will be the sequence, bat path. So basically moving from the launch position into contact. We'll pick up there next week. So have a wonderful week and never stop learning.